Hello! Here's the behind the scenes video for 7 Sticks of Dynamite, an animated short that I've created. You'll have to excuse me for so obviously glancing at the script, right behind the smartphone here, because unlike my previous videos, I don't want to keep on doing the thing where I'm recording 50 takes over and over for each sentence because I keep wanting to talk too fast and sometimes I trip over my own words and all that. And whatever, imperfection is a part of life, let's just embrace it and roll with the flow and all that. Anyway, so a few months ago, I got to work with Red Bull Records after Valve refed them to me, which was a really nice surprise to find out about. They wanted me to recreate something in the Dota 2 universe, the latest music video of the label's biggest band, which is Owl Nation's 7 Sticks of Dynamite. Red Bull Records was like, hey Valve, can you make a cool SFM music video for our upcoming music pack? And Valve was like, we can't do it, but ask this guy. And turned out this guy was me. And man, I know it's gonna sound silly to put it that way, but I never expected to get that much professional validation all at once, because when I found out about that, it just made my entire goddamn month, my year even, and just means a lot, as you might imagine. And thank you to whoever out there just thought my stuff was good enough to be worthy of a referral, and I really, truly, deeply appreciate it. It's just really nice. Thank you. Anyway, this is not the breakdown video for my TI-7 film, I know. Mostly because I would consider this one to be more interesting. And it's easier to talk about making 7 Sticks of Dynamite because it's a lot more fresh in my mind. I'm not going to make a video an hour long this time, because unlike my previous behind-the-scenes stuff, I'm going to be focusing on the specifics of the project instead of touching on broader notions and basic SFM concepts again. For that reason, if you're looking for something that serves more as an introduction to the Dota 2 version of the Source Filmmaker, I would suggest watching King of Pain and its breakdown video. Enigma's Exasperation also works, but it's a lot older and more outdated, and it has a lot of overlap with the King of Pain one anyway. I've stared at the words that I'm saying for a while, not sure where to begin the breakdown and in which order to proceed. So I figure I'm gonna do something a bit different this time. I'm gonna go ahead and show the side-by-side comparison. While that's happening, I'll try to mention all subjects, issues that this video will cover. And since I'll be talking over the side-by-side, you'll be able to find it again without commentary at the very end of this video. Red Bull Records wanted the music video to be recreated. The details on how to do that were all up to me, and I had lots of creative control. That said, going for a shot-by-shot remake was the easiest and most sensible path. I've said it before, coming up with ideas is very easy, but coming up with great ideas, the one you want to keep, that's the tough part. To put it another way, executing an idea is a lot of work, but it's often not as hard as knowing what you need to do in the first place. It was tough enough to come up with ideas for the past 3 TI short film contests, and that was just for 60 to 90 second runtimes. And here, I was looking at 210 seconds. I wasn't going to reinvent a perfectly fine looking wheel. Mind you, this is not the full music video. Red Bull Records made me a version that's shorter than the original by about a minute, to make the recreation easier and speed things up a bit. There's lots of environment art. The share of bespoke content made specifically for my videos keeps growing. The entire bar interior is close to being 100% custom and was created by Shailene Ham, aka Chemical Alaya. I had to exercise some creative liberty to some shots to get around the lack of resources, or to get away from technical constraints. I could have had a mirror here, but the process would have been so elaborate that every shot that shows the mirror would have suddenly become 3 times as hard to make. Not worth it. Lighting was pretty tricky again. There needed to be something very diffuse, warm, smooth, coming from the exterior, as well as overhead lanterns, all of that mixing in LDR space and manually faking global illumination. There are lots of light sources, and a lot of exploitation of shadowless ones. I also had to extensively upgrade and customize characters. The majority of them have modified materials with re-imported customized textures that have 16 times the pixel count. I also had to create custom eyes so that the characters could look directly into the camera. I used motion capture very extensively because there's no way I'd be able to animate up to 13 characters at a time otherwise. The Source filmmaker was a great fit for this kind of use, thanks to its motion editing tools. All the facial animation was entirely N-keyed, however. In a few seconds, there are another couple of shots where I diverge heavily from the original. The long beard guy is a cameo. His name is Rick Rubin, and he's a big music producer. It didn't make sense to keep a shot of what is essentially a random outsider, so I replaced this one by a couple of shots that highlight the rivalry a bit more. This shot right here is probably the best facial animation of the entire video. I'm really proud of how it came out. And right after this one, I couldn't make Bristleback cross his fingers like Dr. Wu, the main tough guy, because he doesn't have any. They're just stumps. I've seen a few comments compare Beastmaster's appearance to Kratos because I made him bald to match the real-life actor. I had never paid any attention to the God of War series at the time, but now that I've played the latest one, which I really loved, I definitely see where they're coming from. I just noticed that I reversed the focus order in this one. I think mine makes more sense anyway. And right there, with the table slam, this is one of the instances where animation has a bit of an advantage over real life, because I could make everything on the counter jump up with the shock of the impact. The standoff scenes revealed that the bar was not only a bit too small compared to the real world, but at the same time, I needed to fit bigger characters in the same space. There's a lot of cheating involved. Lone Druid doesn't play an electric guitar for a few reasons. 1. It's tricky to animate. 2. It doesn't really fit a fantasy universe, we'd have to design something entirely new. 3. Running away from an impending fight fits his role narratively and also what he tends to do in-game anyway. The second cameo is here. The leather jacket guy is Duff McKagan, the former bassist of Guns N' Roses. I make Linnea do the punch-out in this place because it's interesting to see her not do something through burning everything for once. There are 2 swap shots coming up, Bristleback looking down and Tusk looking up, which is the opposite in the original. This is so I can have easier continuity in the getting back up action, which needs to take longer to bridge the continuity error of the cut-down music video. Animating 20 people fighting in the background was just too much for me. I raised the camera so that Tusk would look up at it, and I only have hints of people back there. Flashes of ults, Rylai fighting over, and it works reasonably well. You know, in hindsight, this comparison is really not flattering, though I reckon it's because when I look at it, I see everything that I would have loved to polish, make better, recreate more faithfully, but was unable to. But that's definitely a glass half empty way to look at it. Anyway, let's get started with characters. While Red Bull Records left me with a lot of creative control, one thing which we agreed on very fast was that the 2 sets of characters should be well defined and opposed. For the band and their friends, the so-called runts, I picked heroes that are less bulky, less threatening in their design with primarily cold colors and mostly sports. On the other hand, the bad guys are mostly orange to red, with an imposing stature and kind of the typical 1v5 teamfight hero. I also wasn't asked to tie it in with the Bristleback vs Tusk lore story thing, but when RBR first came to me to explain the project, my mind immediately jumped as to how to integrate the video into the Dota 2 universe as much as possible. Given that the game's world stays mostly in the background of Valve's own creative output, that's an aspect which I believe is something we, the community, generally crave and want to see more of. And we soon will thanks to Artifact. Right now, outside of a few dialogue lines every so often in the game, there's not much to go on. That's also why I believe it's pointless to animate super sick teamfights. There would be little point in doing that when any fight that you would see in a tournament or performed by yourself in a match will always be more exciting than 99% of what a video can convey. In my opinion, it's a lot more interesting for Dota 2 animations to explore what you don't see in the game while playing. That is to say, how characters interact with each other, outside of hitting each other with spells and other gameplay mechanics. Armed with the color and silhouette guidelines that I set upon myself, these are the heroes I chose. The 2 guys I've had are band members. I considered a few other choices that might have seemed more obvious, such as the use of Brewmaster for the bartender. But not only did Lone Druid have a much nicer face, his beard was also a perfect match. General body proportions also mattered a lot. Applying motion capture is a lot easier when the characters are close enough to real-life people. There are a lot of close-ups in the video, and unfortunately for the most part, Dota's character models don't really hold up to that kind of visual scrutiny. Upgrades needed to be made. While the Source 2 tools streamline a lot of the content processes and make a lot more things more accessible, they do so at the cost of some flexibility. They make a lot more assumptions about who is using the tools and in which context/environment. I've mentioned before that it's not possible to edit base content. However, I've discovered it is possible to override it instead. This is what Valve did with Siltbreaker. Some of the enemies were material edits of existing heroes such as Ogre McGee and Lycan, and it works just like in Source 1. If you have a certain file in the base content, it will be overridden if you have a file with the same name and path in the add-on. This is also how game mounting works in SFM1 and Garry's Mod. There are quite a few source files that make up a hero, and we don't have access to most of them. We need the VMDL, the VMAT, every single image referred to by the VMAT, diffuse, normal map, shader masks, ramps, all of the animations, the Lua scripts used by Valve to do fancy processing on those animations, and most importantly the model file itself, complete with all of its metadata, some of which is required to get facial animation going. But we only have this. That is, however, enough to easily override materials. The workshop sources also happen to have the textures in up to 4 times the in-game resolution. They are, for the most part, 2048 by 2048 instead of 512 by 512. I'll demonstrate with Jakiro. I've downloaded his, or is it theirs? His or their package from the Dota2.com/workshop website. I batch converted all the TGAs to PNGs for the sake of compression and also to have thumbnails displayed in the File Explorer. You can use xnconvert to do this if you'd like. There are a few files in here that I can straight up delete, either because they're empty or useless. The root folder contains the textures for the slots, while the base folder will have everything that pertains to the base model, which is usually what interests us, with the exception of a few heroes where the head is separate from the base. The files in the package don't strictly follow Valve's own naming conventions, which is required for the material editor to autocomplete the shadow masks, so you can fix that too if you want. It's not the case for Jakiro, but some of them are also sometimes flipped upside down. Watch out for that. Anyway, I'm gonna copy the files over to my add-on under materials/models/heroes/Jakiro. Now, I'll open the tools and look for Jakiro VMAT. The first one is what interests us. Unlike most materials that come with the game, we can actually edit this one because we have the editable source version, the VMAT, the one that lives under content, and not just its compiled version, the VMAT_C that lives under game. Don't start replacing the paths to the textures just yet, however. As it is right now, the VMAT is still considered to be under Dota, the base folder, and therefore this resource can't access our folder, which will override it. We need to save a copy of it first. The tools should give you the correct path, but make sure to double check. After you've done this, it's your copy that will be loaded, but it will technically be overridden by the base content. That's what the message up there means. That's because it's invalid right now. We haven't fixed the material yet, so it can't compile, be loaded from the game directories, and overwrite the base folder version. All we have to do is replace the paths to the textures, which are currently pointing to where Valve artists stored their original working files, and make them use our new textures instead. You might run again into the dialog box that tells you that your VMAT is in the wrong mod, but just save it at the same place as before. It should still be pointing you to the proper path in your mod. See how much difference that makes? We are quadrupling the resolution of all textures involved in the rendering of Jakiro. And of course, you can do whatever you want to those textures, and editing material properties, especially specular, is very useful to get characters looking nicer under SFM spotlights. You can actually go one step beyond by disabling DXT compression. It's responsible for some of the blockiness, especially in normal maps. It can be found in the options under each texture path. Tick the box No Compress hint and you're set. However, mind that this increases the file size and memory usage of a texture significantly. One way to help a bit with this is to tick No MIPS, which removes MIP maps from the texture. It's no big deal to do this for movie assets. The MIP map and compression settings are shared across the Mask 1 and Mask 2 categories, so you don't have to tick all boxes for both sets of 4 shader masks, just one in each. You can also replace the slots if you'd like, but unless I'm mistaken, we don't have the VMATs for those. However, the material properties for slots are derived from the base material, something that theoretically saves on draw calls. So you could just reuse the base material and swap out the textures for the ones from the slot, and then save the VMAT under the appropriate name, in this case Jakiro_wings.vmat. So yeah, higher resolution materials are pretty nice. Now, we can edit all the texture files we want and make things a bit nicer. I did a whole bunch of editing to bring out the details in Tusk's fur, and get it to blow out a lot less. But it's not the only thing that can be done now. We can alpha test whatever we want to effectively remove parts of the model without editing the base mesh itself, which, remember, we can't. And if I alpha test the eyes out, I can put brand new ones in. I don't have to awkwardly try the thing from the King of Pain video, which was taking the existing eye geometry, duplicating it on top, and then attempting to rig that one by making a best guess at the location of each eye bone. With spheres, the center will be the pivot of the eye, with very rare exceptions. It's so much more straightforward and easy. I also don't have to worry about clipping with the existing mesh, or at least not as much, since the eyelids might be susceptible to clipping sometimes. At first, I was just reusing the existing material for the eyes, clamping the UVs to the available region. I thought it was a smart, efficient thing to do. Turns out it's not. There's often a lot of weird stuff at the edges of the eye in the hero's shadow masks and the normal map, so it's better to have a different material. Clamping the UVs is tedious to do and looks bad, so it's better to just make my own texture. And it's a lot more convenient to have the eyes segregated away from the base material anyway. Sometimes you might think you're being smart, but you're just really playing yourself. I also gave Bristleback his right eye back and removed his scar. I figured that this specific bar fight is just one of the many leading up to the big one in Wolfsden's Tavern, and that's probably the one that gave him those wounds. Material overrides might not seem that significant, but they open the door to an interesting possibility. Instead of alpha testing the eyes out, I could alpha test the entire body out, leaving only the head. Then I could fix the rigging on the body, make the model nicer, etc. And then apply the opposite of that alpha test mask to the new body, removing its head. All of that without losing the original facial setup. One thing that made a big difference was making the tusks of Tusk smaller. They're really quite big otherwise, they were definitely getting in the way. Another thing that will go unnoticed, and it should because that's the point, I had to cap off Lone Druid's base model because those spots are usually covered by clothing, but his base without any armor pieces looks very similar to his real-life counterpart. It should come as no surprise that animation is one of the most time-consuming disciplines out there. In front of me, I had the challenge of animating many characters over a 3.5-minute video, most of at runtime having a lot of them on screen at once. The great thing about SFM is that it is built, by design, to edit existing animation data. You can change hierarchies, apply and remove IK rigs, do a lot of freaky things, all without harming the animation. It's what the entire motion editor mode, which I prefer calling the F3 mode, is about. I would say it's really flexible in that regard, and one of its most useful parts is being able to retime animation data as easily as your hand can reshape clay. You can select ranges with smooth fall-offs, then nudge stuff forwards and backwards, and you have all the filters for smoothing, procedural staggering, and noise. In the parts where everybody is bobbing their heads to the rhythm of the song, this feature was a lifesaver, especially since, while acting each character in my mocap suit, I intentionally tried to go a bit out of rhythm to induce natural stagger among all characters for a natural feeling, and I ended up overdoing it, but thankfully adjusting the timing was a breeze. I used the Perception Neuron mocap suit and acted out most of the mocap myself. I also used stock clips from Adobe Mixamo, especially for the fight scenes. While it has suffered the many ills of acquired startups and has had many really useful features removed, Mixamo is still great here for one reason: it can export straight to FBX. Upload the hero base model, pick the animation, tweak the parameters, download it, and you can import it right away in SFM. A few heroes required me to edit their skeleton and cut away everything that wasn't a limb, clothing, bones, etc. Otherwise the service was unable to make heads or tails of it. Outside of Mixamo though, the process is a bit more involved. First, if I don't have one already, I have to make a cat rig for the hero. Thankfully, this process is streamlined thanks to my friend Ricky van den Wardenberg, who wrote a bunch of awesome MaxScript code for me. He made a smart aligner which snaps object A to object B while ignoring which axis is which, using the closest 90-degree angle instead, so that you can easily align bones and rig objects regardless of their axis orders and local orientations. His most useful tool auto-generates all the constraints between the bones and the rig objects, which saves me a few hundred fast-to-use clicks, and that helps you keep your sanity intact, believe me. This enabled me to make a cat rig for almost everyone a lot faster. Now, after the rig is done, I have to import my BIV file on it, but to do that I first have to import my motion capture on a good old biped. It also provides a few useful filtering options that help overcome the Perception Neuron suit's tendency to have a spike on each step taken. I could, in theory, import a BVH file right onto my cat rig, but unlike BIP, they aren't as standardized and can vary a lot in structure, scale, etc., to a point that going through biped as a purification process is by far the most sensible option. Once that's done, I can export a proper BIP file and then import that on my cat rig. After that, I tweak the animation, animate over it, etc. until I'm happy with the results. Then I export as FBX and import that into SFM. There's a lot of steps to all this, it's true, but once you're used to it, it's relatively straightforward. The only really annoying bit is importing the animation on the eyes. SFM doesn't allow animation to be imported if there's a control rig present or constraints in place. So every time I have to unlink the eyes, import the animation on both the base model and the eyes, relog the eyes to the base, then zero out the difference between the head bones of the base and the eyes. Most of the time, however, I did the eyes right inside SFM, using its own look-at constraints, or animating the rotation myself, and using the workaround trick that I described in the King of Pain breakdown. One special case was the last shot, in which I needed to have Tusk's eyes following a moving camera, so I couldn't, no pun intended, eyeball its position in SFM. I had to transfer the movement. I figured that I could maybe try to export the 3ds Max camera object as FBX and importing that right onto the SFM camera, but it didn't work. Instead, I used the weapon bone from Tusk to carry the data over. It was a bit jittery because it was at the end of a chain and it had to counteract the motions of the right arm, but unlinking the camera after import and applying a bit of smoothing did the trick. Something else to mention while I'm here. I think consistency matters a lot. It makes more sense to me to have something that may be only decent the entire time, but doesn't go below that decent level, instead of something that may sometimes hit very high notes but with lower lows. It might seem a little off topic, but this is actually a very roundabout way for me to point out that I didn't animate Tusk's beard. But because I didn't animate it at all, instead of sometimes animating it very smoothly and sometimes only doing a half-assed job, you don't really notice that it's stiff, you get me? It also does help that it doesn't look off by being unanimated, but yeah. And as a last side note, Lone Druid has a very nice distinctive face, and it was great fun to do his facial animation, but I was disappointed when the time came to copy it over to his beard. It made his mouth look kinda weird. I mentioned earlier that I couldn't replicate the real-life mirror because it would have tripled the workload of every shot in which it would have been. Let me elaborate on this. You can sometimes see mirrors in other SFM1 videos that look completely off because they get the position of the mirror's camera completely wrong. It has to be the exact opposite angle and position, as if the mirror was a symmetry plane. While that's the correct approach, it wasn't possible here because it would have required to call everything past the wall on the second render pass, but SFM can't do arbitrary calling planes like that. It would have also required me to animate the camera in 3ds Max for every mirror shot, in order to be able to export a perfectly opposite version of it. A different approach was considered the old-school style, duplicating the entire scene across the mirror. Unfortunately, that would have also required to mirror every single character, and mirroring animations is a tricky endeavor, even if you don't take into account that you can't mirror models in SFM. In the end, I chose to replace it by a painting which references another music video by the band. If you're an Owl Nation fan, I'm gonna give you 5 seconds to try to guess where it's from.
Run.
The building was modeled entirely in 3ds Max by Shailene as a single prop, with a few parts being broken off into independent models. Here's a neat thing, you can take a look at it yourself in real-time 3D, directly in your browser, thanks to Sketchfab. Check out the link in the description for that. As for the surrounding environment, it's just something I did by meshing existing assets together. The houses are from a Dueling Fates main menu scene that showcased Pangolier when he was added to the game. The exterior was based on the eponymous comic, while the inside is a recreation that tries to be faithful to a real-life bar, the old place in Cornwall, California. Now onto lighting. Let's go light by light for a few shots. I encourage you to look at the list of lights in the animation set editor, as I've taken care to label them in anticipation of this moment. You might remember the bottom bounce thing from the King of Pain breakdown. It's more refined now. It turns out it's a lot more powerful with shadows toggled off and with the angle set just right. It gives a lot of depth to the characters and allows to simulate soft radiosity a lot better. I started making use of shadowless lights a lot more in this short in general. For overhead lanterns, I have 3 lights facing downwards to cast shadows and 3 more facing upwards with a gobo, without shadows, to light up the ceiling a bit. You can see here how a shadowless light from behind and to a side makes a huge difference on Lone Druid. It helps that his face is very well made, with a lot of nice edges to catch the light just right. Combined with the global specular highlight from the other side of the face, the result almost looks like it could be from the Source 1 SFM. The volumetric light beaming in from the window is tweaked on a shot-by-shot basis to keep the density consistent. It was usually done just by shifting it a bit left or right, and making the fall-off a bit longer or shorter. Here, the bottom bounce tries to make it look like the sunlight that hits the table is reflecting back onto Tosca's face. It's rough, but even if it doesn't read as such, it's nice added shading regardless, I think. The shots of Bristleback and his gang make use of a lot of lights to get a nice rim light going on everyone involved. Here, I have a global bottom bounce light, and another one to light up Troll Warlord's face specifically when he gets closer to the countertop. Unfortunately, his quills are low poly enough that they can't catch the light on their edges very nicely. I think if I had more time, I would have definitely reworked and remodeled them. One thing that I liked a lot about him being there was that the volumetric light from the window framed him in an interesting way, and his quills helped add a bit of detail to the volumetric shadows. This one shot only uses 3 lights and shows again how powerful the technique of a shadowless from behind is. It really gives the impression of light bouncing back up from the ground. And here, you can get a clearer look at how each of the 3 lanterns lights up different characters. Finally, outside, I reuse most of the tricks from indoors, but I also have to light up a lot of the vegetation myself, again with shadowless lights, so that the directionality of the sunlight can be read. Speaking of which, it is supplemented by a huge volumetric with a gobo, and the fog plays into it. I set it to be somewhat bluish to cancel out the warmth of the volumetric, and the way it blends together helps out in the color grading phase to bring out the beams a bit in interesting ways. And that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it insightful, even if you didn't like the short itself. If you have any questions about stuff that I did or did not talk about in this video, feel free to get in touch, whether it's by email, tweets, or YouTube comments. Although, YouTube comments are probably the better way to go on about it, because if you have a question that you ask it down here, it's a lot easier for people that had the same question to find it. So yeah, actually, please do use YouTube comments. And, you might be wondering, what's next for me? Hopefully, the TI-7 breakdown video, I'm gonna try to, be a bit less slow about that one. But of course, there's gonna be the TI-8 short film contest, assuming there's another one this year, and assuming they don't ban me from entering because 3 is too much already. But yeah, I do have quite a few interesting ideas, loose threads floating around in my head right now, and I want to try to do something a bit different this time, and hopefully I succeed. And that'll be nice. I mean, I guess I feel like I have to enter this time. I mean, I have less pressure about entering, though, because, last year it was number 3, Valve can't count to 3, max, make them count to 3, also 3 is a hat trick, so you have to win, so it was a lot of pressure, but this time, 4 is not like a special number, so I don't feel pressure, so, it's fine. To cut things short, yeah, I'm gonna try to do something nice and interesting. Although I do wish they gave me more than 90 seconds. I can't remember if I said this, but they actually extended to 90 seconds after I asked them to. I sent them this big email of feedback, and they didn't listen to much of it, but the 90 seconds thing, they did listen to it. But I feel like now I should have asked for 2 minutes. Then again, it's probably gonna be the same for everything I do. If I did get 2 minutes, I would feel like I had to ask for 3. But anyway, you get the idea. That's enough for now, and thanks for watching.
Last of Devotion.
Tune out the stunts.
Tune in tomorrow.
Here come the runs.
To dance, who wants to slow dance? With that rabbit down the hole, rabbit down the hole. I want a chance, I want to slow dance. And trap that rabbit down the hole, rabbit down the hole. Lipstick like
7 sticks of dynamite, lipstick like dynamite.
Who wants to dance? Who wants to slow dance? To that racket down the hall, racket down the hall. Ooh, I want to dance, I want the last dance. And trap that racket down the hall, racket down the hall.
Lipstick like dynamite, 7 sticks of dynamite, lipstick like